I'm Old Sneelock. Welcome to another episode of Old Sneelock's Workshop. I'm going to be doing some infrastructure. I've been wanting to be able to take shots down on the lathe, and I've tried coming off with a apparatus off the back wall, and it worked, but it was awkward. It was right in my way. I kept hitting my head on it. Don't like hitting my head. And I decided that I wanted to hang it from the ceiling. Now, I've thought about all different kinds of ways, using a selfie stick, buying a special camera mount. And then I thought, wait a minute, why don't I just put a board up there and mount it so that it can swing and then latch so that I can use it as a camera mount. So that's what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to take this piece of wood, I'm going to fasten it to the joist above the lathe off to the side. That way I can swing it out and have it be underneath the light so that I can get a shot down. I've already started. I've drilled 2 holes. One's just a through hole. That's going to be the pivot point where the board attaches to the joist. This one is going to have a set screw in it. I'm going to put a T-nut in there, then put a 1/4 inch bolt so that I can spin it over and then tighten the bolt up and hold the camera at the proper angle. The camera that I'm using right now is the Canon EOS 70D. It's very heavy. I think over the top of this I'm going to be using the Nikon, which is a lot lighter, a lot smaller, a lot easier to use in this kind of a situation. I need to have it down where I can see the screen, but I don't want to have it down far enough that I'm going to be hitting my head on it. So up about here is going to be just about perfect. I'll be able to use a mirror and look at the screen, set up the shot, take the shot of the lathe running, and get some better shots of the tools while they're working. Right now, I pretty much have the camera in about that same position, and it's shooting over the back of the tailstock. That means the tailstock's in the way all the time, and you can't really see the tool working. So the idea is, this is going to make it so that I can focus in on the center of the lathe and watch the thing actually working. Like I said, I got started. I got 2 holes drilled in this. I got 1 more to drill down here for the camera mount. Nothing fancy, just a hole. I want to have it centered, so I just kind of cranked the drill bit around until I wallered out the hole big enough for that T-nut to go into. Talking to Dave Chadwick the other day, he and Louie were talking about east wings, and I said I didn't have one, and then I corrected myself. This is the one that I have. You can see I don't use it very often. It's basically dusty. Part of the reason I don't use it much is it's really heavy. It's a 3-pound hammer. Makes a lot of dust when I do that. A 3-pound hammer is much more than what I usually use for projects. Most of the time I'm just tapping something down here. This would be more for out in the blacksmith shop. Now I'm going to have the camera mounted to that T-nut. So I want to have the screw go through the back and lock into this T-nut so that I can mount the camera against it. So this would be where the camera mounts. I want to have this T-nut on the opposite side. What difference does where the T-nut goes make? Well, the T-nut is going to have a bolt going through it from this side, and when I tighten that bolt up, it's going to push against the joist and lock this thing from swinging. I'm going to mount this up with a drywall screw. That'll give it a capture point, and this can then be a pinch. When the T-nut goes in, it tends to shear off the wood ahead of it, kind of packs it into the hole. That's going to lock the camera down. But I don't want to have that nylock's going to work out just fine. Making stuff from junk, you have all kinds of options, but not always the best option. In this particular case, in the junk drawer is a nylock nut that's going to work very well as a stop. Because then I can set it for the camera and tighten the camera up on the 1/4-20 screw. And this nylock nut will act to keep it from vibrating around. Mack trucks have a optional tilt telescope steering column. In that steering column is a nylock nut fastened on just like this one. This one's backwards. We use that as a keeper to make it so that the tilt telly stayed where you wanted it, stayed in adjustment. Well, that nylock nut was a pain in the butt. We ended up having a whole lot of them scrapped out because you had to thread this on backwards. That meant that you had to have a thread going through the nylock that lined up with the threads inside the nut itself. And that was terribly difficult to make happen by hand. So I designed a piece of equipment that had a pneumatic ram that came down and drove this nut on to a fixed bolt, and then it backed it off. Then when you flipped it over, it held the nut in line so that when it went back on, it screwed on just the way it should. It was kind of a simple thing to do, but we had been having trouble for, well, ever since we started making the Mack truck with that nylock nut on it. Once we built that little piece of equipment, no more worries. Cut down our failure point to almost zero. Still had people that put the nut in the wrong way, had people that made mistakes, but the machine made it a lot simpler. Okay, that's taken care of. Well, that's long enough to drag into the wood. So a piece of 1-inch long 1/4-20 thread will do just fine. But having this need a wrench means I'm going to have a wrench every time I work on this. I don't like that. But we have got this nice piece of 1/4-20 all thread that I can put on there, put a bend in, wrap some tape around it as a handle. Then I've got a tool. All I have to do is reach up, tighten it by hand, and I'll be able to do that fairly quickly. So before I do that, I need to straighten up the end on this thread. Easiest way to straighten up the thread on the end is just to run the screw up against the grinder. By running the screw up against the grinding wheel so that the grinding wheel is going this direction. It takes the burr and runs it down off the end of the screw and actually cleans up the end of the thread so that you don't have to do any chasing. No need to put a nut on it. No need to fiddle around with it. You just fasten it in place and run it down. Comes out nice and clean. I'm going to come out here about a ½ inch or so and put a bend in that and then cut that off. Now this vise is really a woodworking vise, but I use it for almost everything. Make a little handle for this so that I don't have to run my fingers against the 1/4-20 thread. Not to add leverage, it's just to pad that little threaded round rod out so that I don't end up screwing up my fingers. Deburr the end. Put a hole in the end of this. A little bit of glue on there. And make sure everything's going to fit up before I put any glue on it. Oh yeah, we're going to extend out there about a 1/4 inch. That's more than enough to anchor that into the joist. Still enough room to clear my knuckles. Mix up a little bit of epoxy. Try not to get any on me because it's devil of a thing to get off. Doesn't take much, just a touch. And I just use the end that I want to glue to mix it with. That way I got it only on the spots that I want it and I don't have all kinds of stuff hanging around with glue all over it. Now I started the thread into the wood. That way I can just spin this in there. There. That should work. Now, despite my best efforts, I managed to get a little epoxy on my hand, so I'm going to have a dark spot there for a while. So I will throw this away. says it sets in 5 to 6 minutes. Leave it alone for 20 minutes to make sure that it's cured, and it's fully cured in 24 hours. We're going to plunge ahead because I'm not going to wait. Okay, now we just have to put a screw in there. 1 5/8 should be more than enough. I want to have this screw be a pivot point, so rather than having just the Phillips head rubbing against the wood, because that's going to eventually sink in, especially when I put this against it, it's going to create a lever effect and pull the screw head into the wood. I'm going to put a washer on there small enough that the head won't slip through it, and that'll give a good solid surface for the Phillips head screw to run against, and it'll also prevent the Phillips head screw from pulling down into the wood. I can snug it up fairly tight, and it's going to wear in. It's going to get looser over time, but then this is also going to allow me to adjust that. So I'm going to run this in with a impact driver and have my camera mount ready to go. UK Tony gave me the idea of using a step up, and I thought, well, I was going to have to go buy one. Turns out I had a Workmate shop box, which does an excellent job as a step up. If I need to, I can swing it up out of the way. This should work very well. It's going to hold that camera nice and solid. Now with the camera fastened on, I'm able to look down on the shot, and with this mirror I'm able to focus in and zoom also. This is a Harbor Freight cutter. And as they come out of the box, they don't cut at all. But they're not the expensive kind that have actually been sharpened before you get them. These are the inexpensive kind, the kind that are just about minimal that you can possibly get. So with just a little bit of work with a hand stone, diamond plate that is, I'm able to make a good, reasonable cut with this inferior tool. This rudimentary camera mount works pretty good. I think I want to make a couple more of them though. I've got some other spots here in the shop that it would be nice to have the camera mounted overhead. And I got some changes that I want to make to this. For one, I'd like to have a knob going through the back of this so that I can just tighten the camera up rather than having to spin the camera onto the bolt. But all things being said, it works. If you have any suggestions for a new video, questions about today's video, or any of the other videos on the channel, just drop a note in the comments. You know I read them all. Thanks for watching.